The grand palace of Astoria buzzed with whispers that autumn morning. Servants hurried through marble corridors, their footsteps echoing against the vaulted ceilings as they carried news that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. In the east wing, where the morning sun cast golden rays through stained glass windows, hung a portrait that had become the center of a brewing storm. Elara had been the kingdom's most beloved artist, known throughout the land for her extraordinary ability to capture not just the physical likeness of her subjects, but their very souls on canvas. Her brushstrokes seemed to breathe life into paint, creating works so realistic that viewers often felt they could step through the frame and into another world. The portrait in question depicted Lady Seraphina, a young noblewoman whose beauty had captivated the entire court. King Marcus had commissioned the piece himself, claiming it was for the royal collection. However, those close to the king knew the truth. He had fallen deeply in love with Lady Seraphina during the spring festival, when she had danced with such grace that even the stars seemed to pause in their celestial dance to watch her. The portrait had become his secret treasure, a way to gaze upon her beauty, even when duty kept them apart. Queen Consort Isabella had ruled beside Marcus for 15 years, their marriage arranged to strengthen political alliances between two powerful kingdoms. She was a woman of sharp intelligence and fierce determination, respected by the nobility and feared by those who dared cross her. Her auburn hair was always perfectly styled, her emerald green gowns immaculate, and her smile capable of both warming hearts and freezing blood depending on her mood. For months, Isabella had noticed the change in her husband. Marcus would disappear for hours, claiming to review important documents, but servants reported seeing him in the east wing, standing motionless before a covered painting. His eyes had lost their warmth when they looked upon her, and their conversations had become stilted and formal. The king, who once sought her counsel on matters of state, now made decisions without consulting her. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning when Isabella decided to explore the parts of the palace she rarely visited. Her silk slippers made no sound as she walked through the east wing, her curiosity piqued by the servant's nervous behavior whenever she mentioned that section of the castle. Behind a heavy oak door, she found her husband standing before an easel, his face illuminated by candlelight despite the bright morning sun streaming through the windows. The portrait took Isabella's breath away, not because of its beauty, but because of the love so clearly evident in every brushstroke. Elara had captured something in Lady Seraphina's eyes that no artist should have been able to see unless the subject was looking at someone they adored. The young woman's lips curved in the slightest smile, her head tilted as if she had just heard something wonderful. Most damning of all, her hand rested over her heart in a gesture of deep affection. "She is magnificent, is she not?" Marcus said softly, unaware that his wife stood in the doorway behind him. "Elara has created something beyond art. She has captured the essence of perfection itself." Isabella's heart shattered in that moment, not from jealousy alone, but from the realization that her husband spoke of another woman with a tenderness he had never shown her. She watched as he reached toward the canvas, his fingertips hovering just inches from the painted face, as if touching it might somehow bring his beloved to life. The queen consort retreated silently, her mind racing as she processed what she had witnessed. In her private chambers, she paced before the fireplace, her reflection flickering in the polished silver mirrors that adorned the walls. She had always known that love had not brought her and Marcus together, but she had hoped that respect and companionship might grow between them over time. Now she understood that while she had been building a life with him, his heart had been wandering elsewhere. Isabella's ladies-in-waiting noticed the change in their mistress immediately. Lady Margaret, who had served the queen for over a decade, watched with growing concern as Isabella stared out the window for hours without speaking. The queen's meals went untouched, and she dismissed requests for audiences with visiting dignitaries, claiming she was unwell. 3 days passed before Isabella summoned her courage to confront the situation directly. She returned to the East Wing, this time when she knew Marcus would be in council meetings that could last for hours. The portrait seemed even more beautiful in the afternoon light, and Isabella found herself studying every detail that Elara had so masterfully created. Lady Seraphina's dress was painted in shades of blue that complemented her fair skin and golden hair. Her jewelry was modest but elegant, suggesting good taste rather than ostentatious wealth. Most striking of all were her eyes, which seemed to follow Isabella as she moved around the room. The artist had given them a depth and warmth that made the queen consort understand exactly why her husband had fallen under this woman's spell. "Your Majesty," came a gentle voice from the doorway. Isabella turned to find Elara herself standing there, paint-stained apron still tied around her waist, obviously having been summoned from her studio. The artist was a woman of perhaps 30 years, with kind eyes and hands that bore the permanent stains of her craft. "The portrait is exquisite," Isabella said, her voice carefully controlled. "You have captured something remarkable here." Elara bowed deeply. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Lady Seraphina was an inspired subject to paint. Her inner light seemed to guide my brushes. The words cut through Isabella like a blade. Even the artist had noticed something special about this woman, something that apparently everyone could see except the queen herself. She studied Elara's face, searching for any sign of awareness regarding the true purpose of the portrait, but found only professional pride and innocent pleasure in her work. "Tell me," Isabella said carefully, "what inspired you to paint her in this particular pose?" "His Majesty requested that I capture her natural grace," Elara replied. "He said he wanted future generations to understand what true beauty looked like. I simply painted what I saw when Lady Seraphina was thinking of someone who brought her joy." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place for Isabella. Not only had her husband commissioned this tribute to another woman, but that woman had posed for it while thinking lovingly of him. The affair was not merely in Marcus's imagination. It was mutual, deep, and real. Isabella dismissed Elara with a wave of her hand, waiting until the artist's footsteps faded before allowing her composure to crack. She sank into a nearby chair, her silk gown pooling around her as tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. For 15 years, she had been the perfect queen, supporting her husband's decisions, managing the royal household with efficiency, and presenting a united front to the kingdom. Now she discovered that her efforts had been built on foundations of sand. The queen consort's mind began working with the cold efficiency that had made her such an effective ruler. If she confronted Marcus directly, he might choose Lady Seraphina over the crown. If she confronted Seraphina, the young woman might flee, leaving Marcus to pine for her forever. But if the portrait disappeared, if this beautiful reminder of his forbidden love was destroyed, perhaps his infatuation might fade with time. Isabella spent that evening planning her next move with the same careful consideration she brought to matters of state. The portrait had to be destroyed, but not in a way that would implicate her directly. She needed to appear shocked and dismayed by its loss, while secretly ensuring that every trace of Elara's masterpiece was reduced to ash and memory. As night fell over the palace, Isabella stood at her window, looking out at the gardens where she had once walked arm in arm with Marcus during the early days of their marriage. Those moments of cautious happiness seemed like dreams from another lifetime, before she understood that her husband's heart was capable of the kind of love she had only read about in poetry books. The decision crystallized in her mind like ice forming on a winter pond. The portrait would burn, and with it, she hoped, would die the spell that Lady Seraphina had cast over the king. Isabella would fight for her marriage, her crown, and her future with every tool at her disposal. The battle lines had been drawn, and the queen consort was prepared for war. The following morning brought with it a fog so thick that the palace grounds disappeared into gray nothingness beyond the windows. Isabella stood in her private study, surrounded by leather-bound books and scrolls that contained the laws and customs of the kingdom. She had spent hours researching the legal grounds for her next actions, ensuring that everything she planned would appear both justified and unavoidable. Sir Edmund, the captain of the royal guard, entered her chambers at precisely 9 o'clock as she had requested. He was a man of unwavering loyalty to the crown, someone who had served the royal family for over 20 years without question. His weathered face showed no surprise when Isabella began speaking of matters that seemed to have little connection to palace security. "Captain," Isabella began, her voice carrying the authority of her position, "I have discovered something troubling that requires your immediate attention. It has come to my knowledge that certain artworks in the palace may have been created under false pretenses, possibly involving the misuse of royal funds and resources." Sir Edmund's expression remained carefully neutral. "What would you have me do, Your Majesty?" Isabella moved to her desk and withdrew a document she had spent the early morning hours preparing. I want you to investigate the circumstances surrounding the commissioning of a particular portrait. Specifically, I need to understand whether proper procedures were followed and whether the subject of the painting had appropriate permission to be depicted using royal resources. The document was masterfully crafted, raising questions about Lady Seraphina's right to have her portrait painted at royal expense, given that she held no official position at court. Isabella had woven together legitimate concerns about financial oversight with subtle implications of impropriety, creating a legal framework that would justify removing the painting for investigation. Captain Edmund studied the papers with the thoroughness that had made him such an effective leader of the royal guard. These are serious allegations, Your Majesty. If proven true, they could result in significant consequences for all involved parties. Indeed, Isabella replied, her tone grave. Which is why I believe the portrait in question should be removed immediately and secured until a full investigation can be completed. We cannot allow potentially inappropriate artwork to remain on display in the royal palace. The captain nodded slowly. I understand your concerns. Where would you like the portrait relocated? Isabella had anticipated this question and prepared for it carefully. Given the sensitive nature of this matter, I believe it should be brought to the secure chamber in the lower level of the castle, where valuable items are stored during legal proceedings. However, given the delicate nature of artwork, I want you to personally oversee its handling. What Isabella did not mention was that the secure chamber she referenced was located directly adjacent to one of the palace's main furnaces, where documents requiring confidential destruction were regularly burned. The proximity was not coincidental, but part of her carefully constructed plan. By midday, Sir Edmund had assembled a small team of trusted guards to carry out the removal of the portrait. Isabella insisted on accompanying them, claiming that as Queen Consort, she needed to witness the proper handling of royal property. In truth, she wanted to see Marcus's face when he discovered his treasure had been taken. The East Wing felt different that day, as if the very air knew that change was coming. The portrait hung exactly where Isabella had last seen it, Lady Seraphina's painted eyes still holding their mysterious warmth. For a moment, even Isabella found herself transfixed by Elara's skill, understanding how such beauty could capture a man's heart so completely. Carefully now, she instructed the guards. This piece, while under investigation, remains valuable royal property and must be treated with appropriate respect. As the guards began the delicate process of removing the portrait from the wall, Isabella heard footsteps approaching rapidly down the corridor. Her heart began beating faster, knowing that Marcus had likely been summoned by servants who had witnessed the unusual activity in his private sanctuary. What is the meaning of this? Marcus's voice echoed through the chamber as he appeared in the doorway. His face was flushed from running, and his eyes immediately went to the portrait being carefully wrapped in protective cloth. Isabella turned to face her husband with an expression of solemn duty. My lord, I have discovered irregularities in the commissioning of this artwork that require immediate investigation. As Queen Consort, I cannot allow questions of financial impropriety to go unexamined. Marcus stepped forward, his hands reaching toward the wrapped portrait as if to reclaim it. There are no irregularities. I commissioned this piece for the royal collection, as is my right as king. Perhaps, Isabella replied calmly, but the investigation will determine whether proper procedures were followed. Until then, the portrait must be secured in accordance with palace protocols for disputed property. The king's face showed a mixture of confusion and growing anger. Disputed by whom? On what grounds? This is my palace, and these are my possessions. Captain Edmund, uncomfortable with the tension between the royal couple, stepped forward with the wrapped portrait in his arms. Your Majesties, if I may suggest, perhaps this matter could be resolved quickly through proper documentation review. In the meantime, the artwork will be safely stored pending resolution. Isabella could see the moment when Marcus realized he was trapped by the very protocols and procedures he had established to govern the kingdom. To override her decision without proper justification would make him appear tyrannical and would raise questions about why this particular portrait meant so much to him. Where are you taking it? Marcus asked, his voice barely controlled. To the secure storage chamber, Edmund replied honestly, where it will remain until the matter is resolved. Isabella watched her husband's face carefully as the captain carried away the portrait, She could see the pain in his eyes, as real as if he were watching a loved one being taken from him. In that moment, she almost felt sorry for him, but the memory of his tender words about Serafina's perfection hardened her resolve. After the guards left with their precious cargo, Isabella remained alone with Marcus in the empty room. The space where the portrait had hung showed a slightly different color on the wall, evidence of how long it had been displayed there. "Why?" Marcus asked quietly, not looking at her. "Why now, after all these months?" Isabella chose her words carefully. "Because I discovered that royal resources may have been used inappropriately. Because questions have been raised about the subject's right to such an honor. Because I am Queen Consort, and it is my duty to protect the integrity of this crown." Marcus finally turned to look at her. And Isabella saw something in his eyes she had never seen before during their 15 years of marriage. It was not anger or frustration, but a deep sadness that seemed to age him years in moments. "And if the investigation finds no wrongdoing?" he asked. "Then the portrait will be returned, and appropriate procedures will be put in place to prevent such questions from arising again," Isabella replied, knowing that such a return would never occur. That evening, Isabella made her way to the lower levels of the castle, using passages that most of the palace residents never saw. The secure chamber was guarded by two of Sir Edmund's most trusted men, who bowed respectfully as she approached. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said, "Captain Edmund asked us to inform you that the portrait has been safely secured as requested." "Thank you," Isabella replied. "I need to examine it myself to ensure no damage occurred during transport." Inside the chamber, the portrait had been unwrapped and placed on an easel for safe storage. Even in the dim light of the stone room, Serafina's beauty seemed to glow from the canvas. Isabella studied the painting with new eyes, seeing not just a rival but a symbol of everything she had never been able to inspire in her husband. "You are beautiful," Isabella whispered to the painted figure, "but beauty fades, and love built on appearance alone cannot last forever." The Queen Consort had made arrangements for the next phase of her plan. In 1 hour, she would return to this chamber with Sir Edmund and report that she had discovered evidence of damage to the portrait, perhaps from moisture in the storage area, or from the stress of transport. She would express deep regret that such a valuable piece had been compromised, but would note that professional art restoration was a luxury the kingdom could not afford during these economically challenging times. The furnace in the adjacent room burned constantly, used to destroy confidential documents and materials that could not be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. It would be a matter of royal protocol to ensure that a damaged portrait containing potentially sensitive imagery be disposed of properly rather than risk it being seen by unauthorized persons in its compromised state. Isabella had thought through every detail, every justification, every way her actions could be questioned. She had prepared responses for every potential challenge to her decision. What she had not prepared for was the sudden understanding of what she was truly destroying. Standing alone with Elara's masterpiece, Isabella realized she was not just eliminating evidence of her husband's affair. She was destroying something genuinely beautiful, something that had required skill, time, and artistic vision to create. She was taking a work of art that might have inspired people for generations and reducing it to ash because of her own pain and jealousy. For the first time since discovering the portrait, Isabella hesitated. Her plan was perfect, her justification solid, her legal standing unquestionable. But the woman who had once dreamed of being remembered as a wise and just queen was about to become someone who destroyed beauty because she could not possess it herself. The clock in the corridor outside chimed 10 times, echoing through the stone chambers like a countdown. In 1 hour, Isabella would implement the final phase of her plan. In 1 hour, Elara's portrait of Lady Serafina would be nothing but memory and smoke. Isabella looked one last time at the painting that had shattered her world, memorizing every detail that had been crafted with such loving care. Then she turned and walked from the chamber, her silk gown rustling against the stone floor as she prepared to become either the savior of her marriage or the destroyer of her own soul. The hour passed like an eternity, each minute marked by the steady rhythm of Isabella's heart as she prepared to execute her final plan. She had changed into a simpler gown, one more suitable for the utilitarian chambers below the palace, and had practiced her expression of shocked dismay at discovering damage to the portrait. Everything was in place for the destruction of Elara's masterpiece. At precisely 11 o'clock, Isabella descended the stone steps to the lower chambers, accompanied by Sir Edmund and two witnesses she had carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion. The guards outside the secure chamber saluted as they approached, and Isabella's pulse quickened as the moment of truth arrived. "Captain," she said formally, "I need to inspect the portrait to ensure it has suffered no damage from the transport or storage conditions." Sir Edmund unlocked the heavy door, and the group entered the dimly lit chamber. Isabella moved directly to where the portrait stood on its easel, her eyes searching the canvas for any signs of the damage she intended to claim had occurred. What she saw instead stopped her completely. Standing before the painting was Marcus, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as he gazed upon the face of his beloved. He had somehow discovered the location of the portrait and made his way to this forbidden chamber, driven by a desperation that had overcome his usual respect for protocol and procedure. "My lord," Isabella gasped, genuine surprise replacing her carefully rehearsed shock. "How did you—" "Does it matter?" Marcus replied without turning around. His voice was broken, hollow in a way that Isabella had never heard before. "You have taken the only thing that brings light to my days, and now you plan to destroy it completely." Sir Edmund stepped forward uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, I was not aware you had been granted access to this chamber." Marcus finally turned to face them, and Isabella saw that his eyes were red with tears, his face aged by grief in ways that years of ruling had never managed to accomplish. "I followed you," he said simply. "I have been following you since you took her away from me, waiting for the moment when you would show your true intentions." The Queen Consort felt the foundations of her plan crumbling beneath her feet. She had anticipated many possibilities, but not this confrontation with her husband's raw anguish displayed so openly before witnesses. "Marcus, please understand. I am trying to protect the crown, to preserve the dignity of our position." "No," Marcus said firmly, his voice gaining strength. "You are trying to destroy the only happiness I have found in 15 years of duty and sacrifice. You are trying to murder beauty itself because you cannot bear that someone else inspired it." Isabella looked around at the faces of Sir Edmund and the other witnesses, seeing their discomfort and confusion. This was not how she had imagined this moment would unfold. Her carefully constructed legal justifications seemed petty and transparent in the face of her husband's genuine heartbreak. "She is just a woman," Isabella said desperately. "Just one woman in a kingdom full of people who depend on you, who need you to be their king rather than a lovesick fool." Marcus stepped closer to the portrait, his hand reaching out to touch the frame. "She is not just anything, she is kindness personified, grace given form, joy made visible. When I look at this painting, I remember what it feels like to believe in something beautiful in a world full of politics and compromise." "And what am I?" Isabella asked, her own composure finally cracking. "What have I been for 15 years, if not your partner, your supporter, your fellow ruler? What was our marriage if it meant so little that you could abandon it for a pretty face?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with years of unspoken truths and carefully buried resentments. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, as if truly seeing her for the first time in years. "You have been a perfect queen consort," he said quietly. "Efficient, dutiful, proper in every way. You have managed the household, attended the ceremonies, and supported my decisions without complaint. You have been everything our marriage contract required you to be." "But never anything more," Isabella finished, understanding finally flooding through her. "I tried to love you," Marcus said, his voice gentle but honest. "For years, I tried to feel for you what a husband should feel for his wife. But love cannot be commanded or arranged, no matter how much we might wish otherwise." Sir Edmund cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your Majesties, perhaps this discussion would be better held in private." Isabella waved him to silence, her attention completely focused on her husband. "And you think what you feel for Lady Seraphina is real love? You barely know her beyond her beauty." "I know her kindness," Marcus replied. "I know the way she speaks to servants with the same respect she shows to nobles. I know how she helps elderly villagers at the market without expecting recognition. I know the sound of her laughter and the way she sees goodness in everyone she meets. Yes, she is beautiful, but her beauty comes from her soul, not just her face." Isabella felt something inside her break at his words. Not jealousy this time, but a profound sadness at realizing that her husband had found in another woman everything she had never allowed herself to be. In her efforts to be the perfect queen, she had forgotten to be human. "And so you would have me destroy this painting," Marcus continued, "because it reminds you that I am capable of feeling something you have never inspired. You would reduce beauty to ashes because you cannot create it yourself." "Yes," Isabella whispered, the truth finally spoken aloud. "Yes, I wanted it destroyed because every time you looked at it, you were choosing her over me. Every moment you spent with this portrait was a moment you were not building a life with your wife." Marcus stepped closer to her, and for a moment Isabella thought he might strike her. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers tracing the tears she had not realized were falling. "Isabella," he said softly, "we have both been prisoners of duty and expectation. You became the queen you thought the kingdom needed, and I became the king I was trained to be. But in all our years of perfect performance, we never learned to be happy." Isabella looked past her husband to the portrait that had caused such upheaval in their ordered lives. Elara's brushwork seemed even more magnificent in the flickering light of the chamber, capturing not just physical beauty, but the essence of a woman who had somehow remained free to love and be loved in return. "I cannot undo 15 years of marriage," Isabella said finally. "I cannot pretend that your feelings for her do not wound me deeply, but I can choose whether to become a woman who destroys beauty or one who tries to understand it." She turned to Sir Edmund and the witnesses who had remained silent throughout the confrontation. "Captain, please record that upon inspection, the portrait was found to be in perfect condition and requires no further security measures. It should be returned to its previous location immediately." "Your Majesty," Sir Edmund replied with obvious relief, "shall I arrange for the transport?" Isabella looked at Marcus, seeing hope beginning to replace despair in his eyes. "Yes, but I have one condition." Marcus tensed, waiting for another political maneuver or legal complication. "I want to commission Elara to paint another portrait," Isabella continued. "One of Lady Seraphina and me together. If she is to be part of your life, then perhaps it is time I understood what makes her worthy of such devotion." The proposal hung in the air like a challenge and an olive branch simultaneously. Marcus stared at his wife as if she had become someone entirely different from the woman he had married. "You would do that?" he asked. "I would try," Isabella replied honestly. "I cannot promise to love her as you do, but I can try to see what you see, and perhaps, in time, we can find a way to be happy that does not require anyone to sacrifice their heart." Sir Edmund and his men carefully wrapped the portrait for transport back to the East Wing, their faces carefully neutral as they carried out their duties. As they prepared to leave the chamber, Marcus took Isabella's hand in his. "Thank you," he said simply. Isabella looked one last time at the portrait being carried away, then at her husband's face, which already looked younger and more hopeful than she had seen it in months. "Do not thank me yet," she said. "Thank me when we have learned whether a kingdom can survive its rulers choosing love over duty, and whether a marriage can be rebuilt on truth instead of obligation." As they climbed the stone steps toward the upper levels of the palace, Isabella felt as if she were ascending toward an entirely different life. Behind them lay the cold chamber where she had planned to destroy beauty itself. Ahead lay the uncertain but potentially brighter future where a queen might learn to be a woman, and a marriage might become something real. The portrait of Lady Seraphina would hang again in the East Wing, but it would no longer be a secret. And perhaps, Isabella thought as dawn approached through the palace windows, honesty might prove more powerful than all her carefully laid plans for destruction. The kingdom would learn, as would she, whether love could coexist with duty, and whether happiness was worth the risk of changing everything they had always believed about power, marriage, and the price of being royal. Marcus squeezed her hand as they walked through the corridors toward their separate chambers, and for the first time in 15 years, Isabella felt like she might be walking toward a future worth living.